I'm Rachel Brooks. I'm Director of TPA Solutions at the Prosperity Agenda, and I'm going to be your host for today's webinar. Please feel free to ask questions at any time during the presentation. You can use the Q&A tool. If you click the button that is probably in your lower part of your screen, and we'll be gathering comments and questions as we go for the end. We'd also love to know where you're visiting from us, so you might see a poll come up to be able to answer what part of the country you're from so we can get to know our audience a little bit. We are excited to have a large audience today, but we might exceed the number of people we have capacity for, so we're also going to be live streaming to Facebook, and we'll be looking for your comments there as well. For people who aren't able to join us, you can also go to that place. This session is also being recorded for your purposes or to be able to share with others. So now let's get started with our webinar and our three amazing presenters. This is our agenda today. We're going to present for about 30 minutes and then still have another 30 minutes or so for questions and discussion. We're going to get to know TPA a little bit, talk about why FCC, the origins of it, the benefits to staff and to the families you're working with, and how it can work for you, and what's next. We're going to begin with our Executive Director, Diana Dollar, to introduce you all to the Prosperity Agenda, our purpose, and our work. I'm just going to...
As a real priority in bringing it out to the work that's happening across the country. We're an organization that designs solutions to change how families or agencies are creating financial wellness and career readiness solutions for families. And how we do this, we do it in three ways. We do it by listening to families who are experiencing poverty. We do this also by learning through the research, definitely from the families themselves, but also through the field. And we iterate on what we have learned, and then we leverage all that work through the strengths of the partners that we have developed across the country to scale that effort. It's an echo, it says, so we want to make sure that you guys can hear this okay. Mm-hmm. It might be related to the volume. Is it still echoing, Devin? Is it still echoing? Could be on my end. Apologies, folks. Let's get this straightened out here. Is your volume on? Okay. Well, hopefully, if anybody has any volume issues, please make note of that on the chat. We'll see if we can resolve that. So we'll keep going. We'll keep moving forward. So a little bit more in terms of the origins of family-centered coaching, and again, going back to why this is so important to the Prosperity Agenda. We are so fortunate and very honored to have had the opportunity to carry this work forward that was started by W.H. Kellogg Foundation, and it being that it was created by the Kellogg Foundation through an intensive research and development process, very similar to our own work. Experts and practitioners from across the country were involved in helping to develop the content as well as testing the content for the last couple of years. And what we found is that there, through this integrated process of building the lessons learned from the field and from other disciplines, as well as bringing innovative practices in working with families, that FCC is not only an open source set of tools, but it also is it's a set of tools to really focus on creating strong relationships and partnerships with families. And why family-centered coaching is such an important approach is because there are three things that we know that have a critical impact on how we practice and how we engage with families. We know that parents are their own best experts of what they need and what strengths they can draw from and build upon, and where those sticky challenges are for themselves and their families. We also know FCC places parents in the driver's seat. We know that what happens within the families affects families and how they are able to move ahead. And so we don't want to segment their lives, and we don't want their goals to be siloed in systems we create. So FCC does, in fact, really put the emphasis on the whole family. And we know that parents need different things at different times, So FCC offers different approaches to meet families where they are. I think that's where, and this is just in terms of describing how that relates to our approach and working with families across the country, is that we do believe that it is about allowing the voice of the family to really drive the work. And that's really where the heart of family-centered coaching.
Thank you, Diana. I'm going to introduce you now to our lead coaching trainer, Devin Stubblefield, a really dynamic leader in the field of coaching for over a decade. He's practiced and trained with us, been really integral to our development. And he's going to share the benefits of FCC and also introduce you to an early tester and practitioner, Tanika Thomas.
Well, I want to say good day to everyone, and it's glad to be here. And this is such an incredible topic to be discussing. Family-centered coaching, there's so much to this, and I want to make sure that you get a good understanding of why this is such a powerful engagement. First of all, when we talk about the benefits of family-centered coaching, we're talking about focusing on the entire family instead of traditionally just working with the person that's in front of us. And so a major benefit to that is that whatever challenges that might be present in the home in terms of the family at large, with family-centered coaching, that can be brought into the conversation with the coach, which is great because it allows the family the opportunity to talk about things that might not otherwise have been brought into the discussion. Now, when we talk about helping families through moving themselves from point A to point B, what happens is this: if we're taking into consideration the larger dynamic, what that can do for that family, and especially that participant, is to help give them bandwidth. And when people are experiencing multiple levels of trauma or experiencing scarcity, things like that, then that certainly takes a toll on their day-to-day cognitive thinking and their ability to process everything all at once, because it's very overwhelming. So this family-centered approach says, let's take a step back a little bit. Let's look at the bigger picture, and let's look at the entire scenario, and let's find some strengths. Let's find strengths that might be present throughout the entire family dynamic, and let's go from there. Now, where that can also benefit you as a coach or as an organization, it really helps you to see where the interventions are going to be most needed right away. Again, these conversations sometimes doesn't necessarily happen initially when it's just direct coaching with the one person, but when we have this bigger, broader perspective, then we can see things a little bit more easily. Now, let's talk a little bit about the mindset. And when we say putting the family at the center. Now, when you're looking at the family, there are a number of things that could be going on. Number one, there could be trauma, as I mentioned earlier. So the intervention should be also based on a trauma-informed care environment. And I'll speak to that in a moment. Then we go into executive skills in terms of what is it that family plan and to organize and actually get things done. And then there's behavioral economics, why families do what they do. And so all of these dynamics actually are playing out all the time. And so from a family-centered coaching perspective, we want coaches to understand that recognizing these three different elements that could be going on and adjusting your approach to match that element is really going to be a very good welcome change for the families. Now, there's something else I want the families' readiness for change. So we're looking at the dynamic through the lens of these three domains. And so we're trying to understand how can we move forward now based on what's showing up. Now, there is the stages of change, and you may be familiar with the stages of change, starting with pre-contemplation, then contemplation, preparation, action, maintenance, and then relapse. Those are the elements of stages of change. So here's what happens in any given intervention. You are having the conversation, and then the participant tells you that they might be wanting to make a change or to do things differently, but then there could be something else going on in the family that may be hindering that process from taking place. And so family-centered coaching says, all right, that's okay. Let's recognize what's going on, but let's take what we call a fluidity of approach. Now, the fluidity of approach is looking at how are we going to respond depending upon what's showing up during this intervention. And so you'll see in the toolkit, there is a drill down on the 3 different approaches that we feel would help to really be the best type of engagement for what's going on. The first one is the case management, and that's when you might need to go into addressing a specific issue or a service need that can be opened and closed at a specific time. So in other words, dealing with what might be a crisis or an urgent situation. And so that case management hack is really executed in a manner that's going to help them right now. But then there is which is basically using motivational interviewing, where you're engaged in a learning conversation with the family or the participant to identify what's getting in the way for them moving forward, and then addressing that. And then also the third approach is the goal setting or the coaching approach, where we're actually intervening with the participant and the family about their particular goals, where they want to get to, how they're going to get there. So you go into these coaching conversations that ultimately lead to goal setting and, of course, overcoming any obstacles that may get in the way. And so this is what we mean by the fluid approach. It is the combination of these 3 different approaches being implemented by the coach whenever necessary. Now, I just want to contrast that a bit with traditional coaching. Traditional coaching, we talk about the coaching mindset. We talk about, really being focused, being completely there with the participant, making sure that they are leading the process and being very focused on them. Where this other approach says there are times when it's going to be necessary for you to maybe shift out of the coaching mode and go into case management mode. Or it could be that if there is a challenge with motivation or them getting things done, you may want to move into readiness assessment. And so being very flexible and being fluid, as we call it, in this process is really at the center of this family-centered coaching approach. Now, here's the greatest thing about it is that you talk to the participants about this up front. So during your initial engagement with them, you're letting them know that they get to participate in what approach or what role that you as a coach are going to play as you go through this intervention. The great thing about that is it keeps them in choice. Because what happens one day when you're in a meeting and they tell you, you know what, I just need help with this today. And so from a coaching perspective, you're saying, all right, let's do that, but let's figure out how the best way to get this done. And sometimes if they don't have the capacity or the motivation or the strength to get things done, then from a case management perspective, you're going to jump in there and help them get to this particular outcome. Okay. And that's totally okay. So I just want you to understand that this family-centered approach is really a flexible one, and it understands that the dynamic that's coming forth totally is based on what is relevant for that particular participant on that particular day. And so I just wanted to make sure that we're very clear on that. And so when we look at this bigger picture, now I'm going to give you an example. So big picture perspective, let's say your participant is really wanting to get some better housing. Okay. Well, at the same time, they want to maybe get their child into a different school. And then at the same time, Aunt Jean, who may not live in the home, but she is very, very, very vital to the progress of everything that happens. She's a big influence, but maybe she has a few challenges of her own. So now the participant, because they understand this is a family-centered coaching environment, now could say to you, well, I want to do these 3 things, but I don't know how to execute on all 3 of them at the same time. So from a family-centered coaching approach, you would then begin to explore, well, what's going to work for Aunt Jean? What's going to work for helping the child get into this program, and what's going to help the family itself move into better housing? So now you're looking at this picture from these different angles, but we're integrating our efforts so that all 3 of these areas, which are important to the family, are actually addressed. And so that is a major, major component of family-centered coaching, making sure that we're helping the family identify those things that are important to them and then moving forward in that way. So you know what we're going to do now? We're going to actually look at some of the steps that we outlined. This is the framework that you're seeing on your screen right now, the framework of the family-centered coaching process. Now, notice these 6 steps, and each of these 6 steps has various things that are very important to the entire whole process. Step 1, preparing for the meeting. This is where the coach, him or herself, is taking a personal assessment. Am I ready to coach today? So there is a checklist and a tool that is available for the coach to kind of check themselves. You know, am I in the right frame of mind today? Am I prepared? You know, go through this process of making sure that the coach can be fully present, fully present in terms of making sure that they are bringing to the table on that day their best self, because you never know what's going to show up. So that's step 1, making sure that we're ready to go. Step 2, now we're getting into building this relationship. And so since we are using a family-centered approach, we got to find out who's in the family. How is that participant defining family? So we have to understand that. So there is a tool that's named Who is in My Family? And that tool is really geared towards helping that participant to say, all right, here are the people that I call family. And each of these people have different roles in my life. These people either support me financially, people may support me with my children, these people may support me emotionally or spiritually. Whatever the case is, this tool allows that participant to identify that. So when you are having your conversations going forward, you can actually refer back to these people, because it's really also a strengths-based process where we're looking for other areas within their lives that could lend themselves to making this process be a lot better for the participant. So that's a very, very powerful tool to use, and it is at the forefront of the initial engagement with the participant. Then, of course, it goes into my hopes and dreams. That's just a tool that the participant gets to think about, what kind of goals do they want to reach for the family. Giving the example I gave earlier with the housing, the children getting into a different program, and then the aunt needing some other things happening for her. And so all those things go on this hopes and dreams tool so that the family can identify exactly what's important to them as a whole. Then step 3, now we're going to kind of drill down a little bit. Step 3 goes into focusing our work. Now, this is the wheel of life. Now, you may be familiar with the wheel of life based on your involvement with coaching, and it's the same wheel, but what's different now is that the wheel of life also taking into consideration all the life domains, but it's also looking at how this relates to the family members. And so there is a second page to the Wheel of Life that goes into a question and answer kind of a space for them to put down exactly what these domains mean in terms of how they answered their level of satisfaction on that wheel. So it's a very, very powerful tool. You're going to be used to that. If you're used to using the wheels, then that will be a very familiar tool to you. And then step 4, getting into assessing the stages of change. This is where that fluidity of approach that I was mentioning earlier comes in, where we're looking at, well, what's showing up with the family right now, and looking at, well, what is the role that needs to be implemented today on the coach's side. But then you also have the conversation with the parent or the participant and ask them to choose how they'd like the intervention to go today. And so we really want you to really dig deep in that part of the toolkit, because that is really at the heart, what I believe can start the transition for a family moving from where they are and transitioning into a better place tomorrow, because you're responding to them. And we hear this, and it's more than the cliche, meet them where they're at. This is really, truly meeting them where they're at. We're saying, you have your feelings today. You think about this today. How can I best support that? And then whether that means you're going to move into case management or move into readiness assessment or goal setting as a coach, then it's totally up to them based on what's important right then and there. Then step 5, now we're getting into taking action. We're going to plan, do, and review. These are the steps that is going to be executed and implemented by the family to move them forward into this better place. And so there's a specific tool there that gives them the opportunity to write this down. You as the coach can certainly be a part of that process, but really it can also serve as the document as you check in with them as they go out and do things in between your meetings to make sure that they're staying on track. And then that leads me to step number 6, which goes into support and accountability, and then establishing the appropriate accountability structures that's going to help facilitate this entire process. Now, it could be that there could be more than one accountability person that's involved. It could be you as the coach, but it also could mean the aunt that's so vital to the family structure. She could be an accountability structure that's put in place. Or it could be someone at their church, or it could be the next door neighbor. It could be anybody. And so again, keeping with the whole concept of this bigger picture, this bigger spectrum of people that are around them that may help them to move themselves forward. When we're establishing the support and accountability, we're taking into consideration anybody within their circles of influence that might be a part of that. And so these are the 6 steps, and the toolkit goes into lots of detail about each of these steps. There is also a content module where if there is a topic that comes up based on, remember we talked about the wheel of life, those domains around the wheel, there are content topics in the toolkit that drills down very deeply on these particular areas. So if you're not as versed in one or more areas around the domains of the wheel, then the toolkit got you covered. It gives you some information, gives you enough to have some talking points, but then it also points you to additional resources that you can refer the parent to, or you tap into yourself to bring it to them to really help them to get more information regarding that topic. And so that's what that's all about. But now I think it's a good time here to actually hear from a coach who actually does this on a regular basis. And so I'm going to invite Tanika Thomas to join us in this discussion right now. She is a workforce development specialist with Goodwill Industries of Battle Creek. And so she is with us today. Tanika, welcome. Okay, Tanika, are you there? All right.
All right. Am I there?
There you are. There you are. Okay. Hey, Tanika, how's it going?
It's going pretty good. If I can get this technology thing intact.
Awesome. Awesome. Tanika, first of all, thank you for joining us. We appreciate you and your willingness to come on. And, you have done some significant amount of work with family-centered coaching, really since the inception of the toolkit. You've been involved and you've had a chance to work with some participants on this. So can you share with us, from your perspective, what has worked? What's worked with you in your implementation of family-centered coaching?
Well, I can honestly say all of it has worked.
Okay.
But, as you move on, it's like every tool, each one of the tools, there's a new light that's shown on it as you move through the process. At first I get, all the tools and I'm looking them over and I'm like, yeah, this can work. But as you move on, it's like when you use it, it just, for some reason, as I go through each one, shone brighter than the other as I began to incorporate all of them into the processes that we have here at Goodwill. So I would say the tools have definitely worked. They've helped me to let go of some things that I did not need anymore that could have been creating barriers for the families that I work with.
Tanika, can you give us an example of a barrier that you experienced that the set of tools in the Family Centered Coaching Toolkit actually helped you to get through?
Well, I would say the first thing that comes to mind would be as far as with the goal setting and with the plan, do, review, and the wheel of life too. Because, a lot of times we go into our sessions or working with families, and we already have this idea of what it is that they need. And so we make assumptions based off of our past experiences or our own experiences, and we try to fit them into that box or into that world. And it might be completely different from what it is that they're actually wanting to achieve or, from what they're seeing. So it kind of helped me stay focused more on the agenda of the family and not my own.
Yeah, that's very important, obviously, is keeping the focus right there with them. So thank you for sharing that. And I agree with you that tool is a very powerful tool to use. And thank you for sharing that with us. But I do have another question, and that is, what have been some of the challenges that you've seen since you guys have rolled out the Family Centered Coaching program? Then what do you see as a challenge? Now, when I say that, I mean as an organization, based on how you all normally do your service delivery. What do you believe is a challenge to really taking this forward?
I think the challenge as an organization and not just individually is that you have many different people working, for the same organization, and you have, one mission. And a lot of times, the organization sets its mission and it's more of individually, but really working in now, considering the family and looking at the family versus the individual that comes to the doors, and really making sure that everyone is on board with that in some way and form. So it gets a little challenging sometimes when you would handle things one way and trying to make sure that pretty much everyone is there, because a lot of times we're still into that case management mode where we want to fix everything. And it doesn't mean that it's necessarily wrong, but it might be the wrong time to move into that. And to really be able to help people understand that they need to let go and let the parents drive instead of us driving for them.
Yeah, that's a good point, and thank you for sharing that. And what I want to share with the group, our audience today, is that there has to be a very, very strongly coordinated effort so that the entire organization is really moving in the same direction. Because ultimately, if there is a transition in the office where the participant is seeing multiple people, obviously we want a scenario where it's a smooth transition, and sometimes that's lost. Let's just put it out there. And so one of the things that the toolkit emphasizes is if you as an organization have the ability to execute on the fluidity of approach, then it could be that maybe one person can move into all three of those approaches. That's great if that's possible. However, reality sets in, and it might be that there needs to be other staff that may be more better suited to execute on a particular approach with a family or a participant. And so the coordination at that point has to be absolutely on point, because we do not want in this process the family to feel any different levels of service, meaning that you're starting out with a particular set of expectations, and we want to make sure that those expectations can be maintained throughout the different interventions that happen within the organization. Now, that would also be true if your organization had to make a referral out to another organization that might provide one or more of the that we're talking about to execute on this fluidity of approach. But that's a very important piece. And so again, Tanika, thank you for sharing that with us. Really appreciate that. Tanika, is there anything else for the good of the order that you feel like you want to share regarding family-centered coaching to the audience?
Yeah, sure. It's a few things. I'm just going to do a little, though. It's really important, really, that first step as far as preparing for the meeting. I think that kind of help us with when we actually go into it and have our meeting. And when I say preparing, you know, really what role are you wanting to play? You know, what are you bringing to this? And really making that clear so that there's no misunderstanding. And for example, like I always let them know, you know, what my role is. Why am I here? I'm not here to do things for you, but I'm here to help you kind of navigate and find what works for you and your family. I'm not here to tell you what to do and make decisions for you, but just to kind of strengthen you so that you can actually fly on your own. And so you just really have to focus on why am I here? And if you don't know that, you know, it's really important for you to kind of get a mission going, you know, and a mission that ties with the organization, but a personal one, you know, like mine is, I'm just here to navigate. I'm here to help you navigate through life or, you know, reach what it is that you want to reach. And so it's just really establishing that before and getting yourself in that mindset before you actually have the initial meeting. That way you don't find yourself wandering because you can see the possibilities that you want them to see yourself, but then you start focusing on that and you're missing everything that they're saying to you. So you're not really actively listening to hear the things that you need to hear.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing your perspective, Tanika. It's been an amazing journey, and it's been great to hear from you, to share the experiences you guys have had there in Battle Creek. So thank you very much. Okay, Rachel, I'm going to turn it back over to you so that you can take us into our next section of the webinar.
Thank you so much, Devin and Tanika. It's really great to hear your experience, and that is what we're going to keep doing, is bringing practitioners from the field who can talk about what they've learned through this process. Tanika and Diana and Devin were all a part of the development of family-centered coaching with the Kellogg Foundation, and it's great to get their experience. So what are the next steps to getting started? We've gotten some questions as we've gone along about these tools. So the first thing we want you to do, that we suggest to do, is go and download those tools. You'll see there's a URL at the bottom of the page there, but you can also go to just familycenteredcoaching.org. You'll see the toolkit. You will see the 6 steps in a briefer document. You will see an assessment and partnership guide, all there for you to take a look at. Spend some time with that when you've had a chance to review those materials. The next thing we suggest is to assess your readiness. There are 2 readiness assessments that are part of the partnership guide, but we've also put them on that page as electronic surveys. They take about 5 minutes each to do. It's a great way to begin that discussion with the other staff you're working with, the other parts of your organization, to see where is your readiness for coaching and where is your readiness for family-centered coaching, and talk about what that means for you as an organization. When you've done that, when you feel like you're ready, reach out to us to talk about training. Let's assess your training needs, talk about what we offer and what we also offer through our partnership, our training partners. Pardon me. The next step would be to connect with us. Please reach out to us on Facebook and on Twitter and on LinkedIn and on YouTube. We are about to have our annual summit. We're going to put up all the videos that we get from that incredible event. We're going to continue to share what we're learning about family-centered coaching. And we're going to be doing this monthly webinar every month, bringing in people from the field to talk about deep diving into these individual tools and just continuing to reach out. So we've already gotten some questions, so let's begin to look at some of those questions. I think, Devin, I'm going to ask you to take this first one. There was a great question from Rod about how do you market family-centered coaching to people around you. We had a different discussion yesterday with some people around the country who are doing family-centered coaching, and they talked about this, about when they started practicing family-centered coaching, how did they share it with other people in their organization, to families, to the other partners they work with. What would you recommend around that, Devin?
Yeah, that's a great question. And what I would do is maybe build some awareness around the benefits of putting together some marketing materials that actually speaks to that. Because so many things that are out there really is really single focused, maybe on the one person. So I would say putting something out that really drives home the message that this is about everybody that you call family, and to really do that. So I would say participate in certain community events, and then raise awareness at some events. In addition to your local coalitions, I would say maybe go first and do a presentation about this whole the family-centered coaching, and just put it out there around your networks. And I believe that doing that alone will spark curiosity, and then people will start to wonder more about what it is and how they can be a part of it. But it's a very, very interesting dynamic. But here's the thing. We talk about financial coaching, life coaching, career coaching, all of that. Family-centered coaching has all of those things wrapped into it. And so maybe one thing you could do is maybe reach back out to some of your other partners around the community that maybe have already engaged with you on certain other elements, and then just introduce this thing about family-centered coaching to them as well. Because it's really, really about looking at this bigger picture and identifying, those other pieces of the puzzle of a person's life. And again, everyone may be interested in doing something like that. So that's what I would say, just build awareness around the family dynamic.
There's another question here. And Tanika, if you feel like you can jump back on through your phone, I think it'd be great to get your perspective on this too. And about that question around marketing, but there's also a question about that fluidity of approaches around shifting from case management to motivational interviewing or assessment, and also setting goals through coaching. And if people were attracted to one of those more, or you found that you were often going towards one of those more, can you share a little bit about that, Devin, first, and then maybe we can ask from Tanika as well?
Yes. It's usually from this side of, things, the first thing is you're always thinking case management. And, and some people get scared of that word, case management. It means I've got to do. But, as you get moving, you find that your role is not to do. And so it becomes easier to kind of move through. And it's really important to make sure that you are listening. And really being focused on what is being said to you, the things that the family is saying. That way you'll know it becomes a little easier to switch. If they're in crisis, yeah, sometimes you have to handle that. And that's that case management piece. But that seems to be more of when the times that I use that case management. But utilizing the tools kind of help with that too. Because before they leave, we typically set the agenda for the next meeting. And so it kind of helps me determine what role I will be playing for the next one. And a lot of times, if it's the goal setting, is one that we seem to be using a lot now, that really kind of helps keep them, helps keep me aware of what it is that we're going to be working towards for the next one. The next meeting.
Yeah, let me add to that. Yeah. Okay. So I do think that the public is more geared towards a case management approach. That is probably the most seasoned approach that's out there. And so quite naturally, before a family understands what coaching is, sure, they may lean towards saying, hey, I want you to, engage me as a case manager and help me get to this particular outcome. That's probably what you're going to hear the most when given a choice. Because if they are unsure themselves or they don't think that they can actually get things done or self-efficacy might be low, then of course case management may take center stage. But here's where the opportunity lies. The opportunity lies it's a skill we call scaffolding. Scaffolding is one of those things in coaching that says that I'm going to do it with you initially, but the goal is to help you to do it for yourself. And so what I would say, if you're finding that most of the participants are choosing the case management route first, then I would say bring up this scaffolding dynamic and say, hey, let's do this together, but you at some point should be able to execute this on your own. And so having that expectation along with the case management can certainly transition you into a coaching dynamic. But of course, if there is a challenge with motivation along the way, then you may have to go into that readiness assessment, that learning type of conversation with them as well. But that was a great question, and I appreciate Gila for asking that question, because that's important. But again, we want to make sure that the family is choosing approach. But remember, as organizations, we can certainly still raise their awareness on how they can actually get to this final outcome by engaging in some of the other approaches that is making up this family-centered coaching dynamic.
Thank you, Devin. I think another comment that came in was, I think, a request to talk a little bit more about the why of FCC that Diana touched on at the beginning. But let's hear a little bit more from Diana about the why of FCC.
And definitely Tanika and Devin jump in. I think Tanika specifically about what more of a practitioner level perspective of why FCC. But I would have to say, from our experience of doing coaching work for the last since about 2010, 2011, one of the things that we've understood very much about the relationship between coaching or the coach or the staff person and the individual is that there's a door that opens to allow the individual to see what is available to them that's relevant in that moment in their life. Oftentimes what we have found in the way when we've tested programs is that there's a lot of information, a lot of expectation put on individuals to follow the rules in the program that may not necessarily be relevant to the individual at that moment. And unfortunately, what that often translates into is the fact that they're not fully participating in the way that they probably would if it was relevant in their life. So taking a family-centered approach means that you're coming at it from the perspective of what's important to them in the moment. And what you provide to them in terms of access to resources becomes relevant and becomes more useful and effective in their lives. So I would just say, from our perspective on the testing side of coaching, that the why has a lot to do with if you've got resources available to someone, you want to know what's relevant in the moment for them so that they can fully engage and fully participate and utilize those services and resources in the way that's going to help them move forward in the way that they want to move forward. So, and I don't know, Tanika and Devin, if you want to add to that.
No, I think, Diana, I think you did a great job of explaining that. And the thing I think to remember most is that the organization really, you have to prepare yourself for this type of engagement. Because again, it is new, and it might be, there might be a transition period for your organization to really, for everyone to fully grasp the entire concept. But I would say, everything that you need to do to execute on this, you'll find in the toolkit. It's very well written, and there's lots of information there that shows you how you can actually help family-centered coaching land in your organization in a manner that's going to fit you. Okay, so I would certainly point back to that And of course, you can reach out to the Prosperity Agenda if you have any questions.
There's one other thing that I want to add, and Tanika, I would really love for you to jump in with this, and that is why, going a little bit deeper in terms of why FCC, because there are elements in FCC that are very different than any other coaching model that's out there right now, and it has to do with this ability to toggle between coaching, case management, and motivational interviewing, as well as, what does it mean to take that whole family perspective or approach to this. So Tanika, I don't know if you want to speak specifically to how FCC has really made a difference with respect to, coming back to this question of the why FCC?
Yes, the why, that's really, I think, speaking from our organization, the why was more because everybody is not, a lot of times we're out just looking at, and it's more client-based, as people walk in and you're just really looking at that individual, but you're not taking into consideration that they're making decisions based off of the family. Even when you talk about something like employment and, trying to find a job or really trying to find the right job or moving into the career field, they still working with single parents or even families that, are limited with as far as how much time they can spend in the workforce. It's really important for us to really incorporate the family in the idea, because once you start having these coaching sessions with them and you start asking these questions and, and letting them use the tools, then it starts clicking to them like, oh, well, yeah, I think I need to look more into the child care piece of it. Or I think I need to look more into what is realistic for me. Yeah, I can go to school full time. Okay, well, that's a goal for you, and then you start really narrowing down the pieces of that. What does that really look like to you? So the why, just, I think for us, it helped us really be able to have these sessions, coaching sessions with our families, and it helped them be able to really open their eyes to reality, I guess, and then not in a negative way, but into a way that they can be more successful in the outcomes of the goals that they set.
And I know we've got one more question, but I'm also, Tanika, wondering if you might touch on the aspect of what it means for you as a staff person working with families. Like, what has FCC really provided for you in terms of what makes the difference?
I would say it's really, and I keep going back to this, it's made my work easier, because now I'm more out of the fix it and more of the help, and, and so it's easier for me to actually, I guess, even go home at the end of the day without the stress. It's taken a lot of the stress off of me, because I don't feel like I have to perform, because a lot of times we feel like we have to have certain outcomes, and really these outcomes are outcomes that we put on ourselves, because we might feel like we failed because we're taking ownership of someone's life when we really need to let them of their own lives. So I would say, it really, the FCC has really, all the tools has made things easier on me. And it's easier because it helps me pay attention. So sometimes when you have to sit down and say, okay, what's really going on? Is this me driven, or is this going to be something that, that they're actually doing? And so it helps me stay focused on the real agenda, which is the agenda of the family.
That's great. Thanks, Tanika.
Thank you. We've got a couple more questions here. The first question is about program implementation. It says, to what extent do you think tools and elements of the full FCC framework can be chosen and piloted to test out within our current service model across 3 programs? or is the full coaching toolkit really needed upfront in order to achieve results? So I'm going to just take a couple of that parts of the questions. I think in terms of being able to offer it across different programs, it is a great strength of family-centered coaching that it's not a financial coaching model alone. It's not an employment coaching model alone. It's not just for working with in terms of parenting. It really is a very adaptable model that you can use across different programs. So without knowing too much about your programs, I would say it was built to be able to work across different program models. I'd say as you're starting to understand what it looks like to implement this across your programs, a great place to start is with those assessments, because it will take you through that understanding of your own programs and being able to go from a fully staff-driven mindset to a coaching mindset, and also to be able to go from your own program goals and what that looks like for a family. So I would actually recommend starting there with those assessments and going through that and looking at what that would mean for your for those 3 different programs. I think that there's definitely a lot of progression that you can see in being able to implement a lot of the principles and values of family-centered coaching and then bring the tools into it. But I think it's really about fundamentally changing the way that you work with families. And so, go through that assessment and try and see how, that transformation can happen within your programs. Devin, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I would say that, let's take a step back a little bit. The family-centered coaching approach has a big assumption, and that assumption is that your staff may have already been exposed to coaching, because the toolkit isn't going to show you how to coach per se. It's going to help you to understand how to use tools. So I would say if you're looking at taking this into your organization, my initial form of coaching training or coaching exposure prior to using the toolkit, especially because there are some specific call outs in the toolkit that we have saw is the most effective in terms of common coaching skills. And so if your staff has not already begin to develop competencies in those skills, then it could be kind of a learning curve for them to really do it. Now, can a person read the toolkit and use? Yes, they can, because it is formatted in a way that you can read it, understand it, and what I'm talking about here, if we're going to be moving into actual coaching, coaching from the sake of coaching, by the definition of coaching, then I'd say having that exposure to coaching up front would help a lot for the staff.
We have 3 questions coming up. I think we'll be able to answer those 3 questions, and then we might have to wrap up. But let's jump to a couple of those. I think the first one from Larry asks about, are we face-to-face with the family or only the person who presents as the presenting customer who interacts with the family? I think, Devin, you can probably answer this one.
Can you repeat that question again? I'm sorry.
Sure. Larry's asking about whether you're in family-centered coaching, are you with the entire family or are you just talking to one member of the family?
You know what? That's a great question. And Larry, I would say this, that's up to them. Because if they want to bring, the initial participant, Aunt Jean and Uncle Bob and Grandma to the meeting, then that's okay. Because we're saying that family-centered coaching, they get to choose how they engage. And the other thing, it could be that one meeting you may have everybody show up, another meeting it might be 2 of the family showing up. So again, it's just based on them. And so I would say you have a very clear conversation about that up front, and then set the expectation that you guys are going to need to produce some consistency so that we can make sure that we're addressing everybody in a manner that's going to work for the whole. And so whatever that means to them, let them define it and then hold them accountable to that, so that if there are multiple interventions, that each intervention is as close to be what that original expectation was set from the beginning as possible. But again, you could be talking to more than one person. And this is another dynamic that's different from other coaching models. It's the fact that you could have more than one person in the actual engagement of the meeting.
Thank you. Yeah, and I think if you are working just with one member of the family, I know I've heard Devin talk a lot about, building a champion for the family who can take the coaching and the partnership that you're bringing through family-centered coaching and then bring that coaching back into their own families and be that champion. Another great question, I'm excited to hear this, is as a supervisor, how can we best support frontline staff with confidently implementing coaching? Devin will have something to share on this.
Yes, that's a great question that comes up often. And the best and highest recommendation that I could give in regards to this is that the supervisor needs to understand coaching as well, if not better, than the staff. Because what we found in some organizations that everybody has their different way of finding coach. Okay, what does coach mean? And so what we're suggesting is that whatever your organization determines as the what a coach does, the responsibilities, the competencies, and the expectations, then I would say that you build an assessment tool around what those things are, what those expectations are, and then have frequent check-ins. Coaching is one of those disciplines that just like riding a bike, you get better as you continue to do it. Mm-hmm. And I believe that the more frequent supervisors engage with staff around how they're progressing as a coach, I think your organization is going to benefit from that long term. Because if a person feels that their coaching is ineffective, and you might not even hear this as a supervisor, but they might internally feel that way. Mm-hmm. But if the coach feels ineffective, then what tends to happen is that they stop coaching and they revert back to their traditional form of engagement. And so maybe as you go through and think about how you guys are going to do this, what kind of measures can you put in place that can assure that the coach and the spirit of coaching is maintained throughout a service delivery year? And so of course you got to think about that. And there are trainings out there that is specifically for supervisors. Rachel can give you more information about that, of how prepare themselves to coach their coaches and to keep the coaching very front and center within the organizational delivery. But again, it's going to take a concerted effort of your team creating assessment tools that you can really measure and that people can actually, adhere to.
Thank you, Devin. I'm really glad to get that question about the supervisor because they are so important for effective coaching, play such an important role. We had one more question, but we have run out of time. We are so grateful for this conversation and we are going to do this so much more. We really appreciate your patience as we are live on webinar here, and we're so glad that we could be live. But it meant we had a few technical difficulties, but we're just glad that you stuck with us so we could have this conversation. We will be posting this right afterwards. And I hope you take those next steps. I hope you go to that website at familycenteredcoaching.org, download those materials, and take those assessments and get in touch with us so that we can continue this conversation. Thank you so much, and we'll see you again. Have a great day, everyone.